Have you ever been gaslit by a doctor? Maybe chasing after something that's going on and being sent away and just dealing with the monotony of it, the craziness of it? Well, I'm going to talk about that today. My name's Neil. If you haven't seen my videos, I have a handful of different chronic illnesses. One being end-stage liver disease, with all the fun stuff that goes with it, like portal hypertension and fluid retention and hepatic encephalopathy, which is where the ammonia can affect your brain. Also, I have something called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a connective tissue disorder. It affects the collagen in your body. It's kind of missing a part in there that's supposed to keep your ligaments and lots of other parts of your body strong and elasticy and to hold everything together. Mine do not do that properly, so it causes a lot of issues. And I also have asthma. I have multiple hernias, and I'm on a feeding tube and a bunch of other fun stuff. But I kind of want to talk about being gaslit, just going to doctor, because if have you ever been through a situation where something's going on, something's wrong, something just doesn't feel right, it doesn't seem normal. Maybe you've talked to some people, see if they're dealing with that kind of thing, and it's not a normal thing, and you've done some research online, and you go to get to your doctor, and you've got all the stuff you want to say. Maybe you forget a thing or two because there's a lot going through your mind, and they look at you and they're just like, oh, well, it's just stress, or it's some acid reflux, or something simple, and they kind of shrug it off, and out the door you go, and yet no resolve. You're just dealing with this stuff going on and on and on, and eventually gets to the point where maybe you've given up on going to the doctors, and now you're just dealing with it. And these problems, they don't generally get better. Generally, they get worse. So the more we ignore them, the more damaging they can be. So it's kind of like we're hurting ourselves in this process because we're not getting the help that we need throughout it. In my situation, I started out with asthma. I was diagnosed when I was like 10, and I spent a lot of time in and out of the hospitals every spring, every fall. But about my teenage years, I started being constantly in pain. The pain would just go from my neck into my shoulders, especially into my shoulders, down into my elbows, into my fingertips, down my legs, my knees. My whole body would just hurt all the time. Doing things like throwing a baseball or a football would pop my elbow out, and I'd be in excruciating pain from that. And, I just dealt with this for a while. And I started going to doctors, and I went to one after another, and they all, they did their blood test, and they're like, oh, you don't have any kind of arthritis, and you're too young to have these problems. And they would be like, it must be stress, and they would send me on my way. This went on through my 20s, and finally I got to the point where I was like, I guess everybody's in some sort of pain all the time, because the doctors would say something like, we all get pains from time to time, or, we work hard and, our bodies can hurt, things like that. And it was really invalidating the things that I was trying to say and how I felt. It felt like I was just being shrugged off and ignored, because in their mind, they couldn't be anything because they're the authority on this. And off I went, and going through my life, living it. And I was always extremely double jointed as well, but I had no idea that these things had a connection whatsoever. I could bend my hands in funny ways, turn my legs backwards, bend my elbows out, and my knees the same thing. And, over the years, my knees just got worse and worse and worse. They would, every time my knees were crunching in my late 20s, for crying out loud. I'd walk upstairs and they would just be like crunch, crunch. And, this pain never went away, and things like showers would make it worse. Some days I'd have no energy and I just couldn't get out and move, and I'd be so worn down And I would just be, somebody would be like, oh, you're just being lazy. And, for all the times I was being told I was being lazy, eventually, you know, I finally got answers, but I didn't get answers till actually fairly recently on this. About in 2022, I was diagnosed with end-stage liver disease. I only drank for about 2 years, so it seemed odd to me that my liver failed that quick, but I didn't question it. I went into the doctors, told me everything was going on. I couldn't breathe at the time because my lung was completely filled with fluid, and, I had fluid built up in the stomach. My legs were like tree stumps, and, I was hospitalized, told I was in liver failure, and, this kind of went on, and they sent me home, and I was like still really confused about it. They never actually explained what this all really meant, and I kept winding up back in the hospital over and over and over again with no resolve to it. And they put a chest tube in because my lung kept filling up with fluid. Like, they drain it, and then the next day it'd be full again. And this went on for quite a while, and finally got to the point where they were like, you got 90 days to live. And I pulled through this. So, I made a decision that I was going to start moving and walking, and, I wasn't going to take what the doctors just said, that, oh, stick a nail in it, he's done. I'm not going to do that. And I just continued to start exercising, moving, and eventually I pulled my way kind of through that, and a lot of the symptoms have kind of evened out. But I started having issues even back then when I was in the hospital, like swallowing things. Like, some of the food would get a little stuck, and I'd have to drink water. And, I assumed that maybe it was a hiatal hernia, because I heard that people who drank had hiatal hernias. And this time I still I was thinking that, oh, well, this is all from the alcohol for 2 years. I had no idea. Nobody bothered doing any kind of test to find out why my liver failed. They just made an assumption and just went with it. And I wound up moving. And, and throughout this next few years, more answers started being answered for me. Finally, I got a better liver doctor who actually went through, and they did they actually pulled a core out. They did a biopsy, found out that there was, the damage was full all the way through the liver, but there was no signs of any kind of disease. There was no left damage there. There was no, they couldn't find anything that was definitive to point why my liver had failed. And the swallowing issue kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And I was told there was no hiatal hernia. So I'm like, that's interesting. So they started doing, the EGDs where they go down the scope, and they were like, oh, well, everything looks fine. So we're just going to stretch it. And they put Botox in the, down there to try to relax the muscle. And none of that helped. I did this thing 3 different times. They did the Botox and stretching, no help. And this just progressively got worse. And, finally they did ran tests, found out that my esophagus is grabbing and not letting go, and said it was out of their wheelhouse, and they sent me to the same hospital that my liver disease is being diagnosed. So they made me redo the test that I did prior. And they did the second test wrong. And I explained that you're supposed to, sip the barium fluid, and they had me drink the whole thing first, which of course nothing would show on the x-ray because they want to see it as it goes down. Well, you already had me finish it before doing an x-ray. And, I tried explaining this, and they just kind of shrugged me off. And I wasn't getting anywhere, and food kept getting stuck, sometimes for 24 hours. I'd have to go to the hospital. They'd have to go and do a scope, pull food out. And this carried on for like a year. Like I said, finally got to the point where I stopped having an appetite. I stopped eating. And this carried on. And I'm like, something doesn't make any sense. So I started doing a little bit of research. And I'm looking for the combinations of all these different things. I'm like, I've had this body pain, the asthma, then the liver disease, then the swallowing issue. This has got to be some kind of connection. And I did some research, so I always recommend advocating on doing some research on your own. Don't go down any rabbit holes and be like, oh my gosh, I got this no matter what. But, doing your own research, there's nothing wrong with that. Make sure you're not taking people's opinions, but you're actually finding facts. That is important because there's a lot of people's opinions, like mine, but you want to go with, looking for facts. And I was looking for the connections there, and I find something called the hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I'm looking at it, and I'm going, holy smokes, I've got these hernias. That's a common thing from that. The swallowing issue is a common thing from that. The pain, the flexness. I'm like, this is interesting. So I have a really good doctor that I have for my regular doctor, and she got me in to see a genealogist. They're the ones that do the testing for this, and they do a thing called a Beighton scale. And sure enough, I have it. And so things started making more sense. And finally, with the hospital that I was going to that did the test wrong, this swallowing issue kept getting worse. And I kept calling them over and over again saying, there's got to be something done about it. And they're like, oh, we don't put food tubes in people with liver disease because, this, and that. And I'm like, well, how else am I going to get food? And then it got to the point where I couldn't eat for 3 days. I decided to drive to this hospital, and this hospital is 4 hours away. And they redid the test, and they found out, yep, no food's going down. And they put the tube in my nose, scheduled me for the surgery and all that. So, I want to say, don't ever give up because you can find answers. Right now, I'm dealing with these headaches and stuff too. So this hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the connective tissue disorder, is collagen-based disease, and collagen is in your organs. It's in your ligaments, your tendons, it's skin, it's all over the place. My incision from the surgery ripped back open because of it, because of the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And, recently I've been getting headaches and pain in the back where the spine connects to the skull. And there's a thing called cranial cervical instability. And, I've got a lot of, they actually track the swallowing issue to that, which, I found on that. So, because this disease isn't as common, I was able to find this information and find these papers that were written and stuff. And now I'm able to present that to my doctor, which I'm working on now, because obviously if there's an issue there and those ligaments are loose and it's starting to pinch things and move things, that could cause a lot more issues. So the point being, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. It's so very important. It's your body. You're the one that's dealing with all this stuff on a day-to-day basis. So don't ever give up, okay? Never give up. There are answers out there. It's just a matter of sometimes finding them. Some answers are harder to get than others. Sometimes you get lucky and you get one right away. And I do think that the medical field has changed a lot over the past 20 years since when I first started going in about the body pain, because a lot more things there's more known about them now and there's more information. I've never had a doctor be like rude to me or like treat me, outright, pretty much tell me I'm full of it or anything like that. But I've had a lot of doctors smile and nod and blow me off in the non-confrontational, wow, my brain's not working. See, the liver disease affecting the brain, can't even speak. Anyway, I've had a lot of doctors, blow me off in the non-confrontational kind of way. And, I've dealt with that, but I didn't give up. And for yourself, don't ever give up. Dealing with chronic illness is hard enough on its own. Dealing with doctors that kind of want to push it off and ignore it makes things so much worse. So if that's what you're getting, get a second opinion, find another doctor. You have those rights. That is something you're allowed to do. So make sure you advocate for yourself. And yeah, do some research. Now that I know what I have, I'm able to find out more about these things. The liver disease, I've been able to get it kind of on an even plateau because I did my research, because I found out what I had, and I was able to find out that, you limit the fluids and, extra protein and exercise and things like that to help keep the liver going, even when it's hurting. So there are different things that can be done throughout this process once you have that information. It's just a problem of getting that information sometime. So if you're fighting this battle, I really do wish you all the luck in the world. And I want to say to you, don't give up. Keep pushing, keep going, because there's got to be an answer out there, somewhere. It's just a matter of finding it. So don't ever give up. If you liked what you see, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Follow if you'd like. Also, if you'd like to help me, it is kind of difficult to make it through on disability when you're all by yourself, especially when, that barely covers the bills, and like my truck, the transmission's going out, things like that. If you want to help me, you can. There's a link in the About section of the video. But until next time, I hope everyone has a great, wonderful day. Stay blessed, and I wish you all the luck in your endeavors.